Good morning, Colton. With the recent Supreme Court decision about gay marriage, lots of people have shared lots and lots of ideas. And being in China, I'm a bit out of the loop, so this might be a tad late, but I thought I'd add my own 2 cents to the discussion. The gay marriage debate is the wrong debate. It shouldn't be about whether or not gay marriage is right or wrong. It should be about who has the right to decide if it's legal. Who should define morals for our society? And more specific for this situation, who should define what marriage even is? For many people in this country, religion is a guiding sense for what they decide to be morally right and morally wrong, which is both a very powerful and valid place to draw your beliefs from. And if we're going to step back and be honest about this debate, it seems to powerfully divide along religious lines. So to understand this debate, first we need to understand how religion is used in America to affect both societal ideas and legal procedures. Now, religion is an important and powerful part of American society. It always has been, and it most likely will continue to be. However, when using religion to define a society's morals, it begs the question, whose religion and whose morals? Living in a society, we can't expect to agree on every front. Therefore, we have to come up with a collective moral sense that will hopefully be acceptable to the majority, but will never satisfy the entirety on every single account. That's just part of the social contract. That's just part of living with other people. The only way to avoid it is to go live in the Arctic. Now, the 2 main points that are cited by the 2 opposing parties is 1, the freedom of religion, and 2, the separation of church and state. When America was founded, a Bill of Rights was put together. Have you ever stopped to wonder why the things that are there made it there in the first place? Was it just a bunch of nice idealistic things that sounded great to a group of intellectuals? No, each aspect of the Bill of Rights comes from negative historical events that the Founding Fathers were trying to avoid repeating in their new governmental experiment. So what gave the Founding Fathers of America such a peculiar idea of separating church and state? Well, simply put, they had observed generations of people killing each other over religion and preferred to not go down that path. It's a chronic problem that the world seems to have, but for time's sake, let's just look at Britain, the country that the Founding Fathers would have had the closest relationship to. And now it is time for a poorly animated short history lesson. Colton, this is Britain, land of fish and chips, big watches, and a very confusing royal family. It is year 1534, and King Henry VIII wants a divorce. The Pope says nope, divorce is morally wrong, so I'm saying that you can't. To which Henry said, screw you, I'm making my own church. Years later, his daughter Mary takes control, and she was raised Catholic. She wanted to reinstate Catholic morals and did so in a somewhat aggressive way, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. After her death, Mary's half-sister Elizabeth became queen, and yep, you guessed it, she reversed the country to being Protestant and undid all the Catholic-y laws. Next, James from Scotland became king, and he was a Protestant, but he had a Catholic wife, which made many of the people of the day uncertain about what would come next. His son Charles I was kind of a prick, and also had a really Catholic wife, so rather than dealing with that again, the Parliament just cut his head off. He was replaced by an essential dictator, Oliver Cromwell, who was a hardcore Puritan, and everyone wear boring clothes, let's close the theaters type of Puritan. So for his whole rule, the country adopted a strict Puritan moral code. After a decade of that, people decided they weren't a huge fan and invited Charles' son, Charles II, back to be the new king. He was not a Puritan and reversed all the old Puritan laws. His son James II was suspected of being maybe kind of a little bit Catholic, so Parliament actually asked Protestant William of Orange if he would kindly invade the country and put an end to all this Catholic nonsense. After a bit more of this confusion, they passed a law saying that only Protestants could be in charge and found some distant, obscure, somewhat royalish person to fit that description, King George I, the great-grandpa to the King George that the Americans of 1776 just adored. Colton, can you imagine how confusing this must have been for the simple fish and chips makers? Not to mention how detrimental to individual liberty. When one religion would take over, their moral code would become the law of the land, only to be switched a few years later. Not to mention, tons of people would be persecuted and other terrible things. Over in America, they thought this whole, he isn't Catholic, we want him, may not be the best way to pick an executive ruler and decide on laws. Hence the Bill of Rights. The separation of church and state law has 2 main points. First, the country won't choose a favorite religion, and second, they won't ban any religions. This radical new idea guaranteed freedom of thought and belief for religion, while at the same time promoting individual liberty. The point of this part of the Bill of Rights is to avoid power struggles like the poor English software generations about whose morals we would choose to live by. Not to regulate morals either for or against religion. Separating church and state doesn't limit the power of one or say that one supersedes the other. What it does is it allows good people of different beliefs and different backgrounds to coexist without one of them having to be right. Colton, morals should be defined by families and by communities. And marriages should be defined by the people in them. After all, Every existing marriage ultimately comes down to the fact that the most defining aspect of its validity is that the people involved in it believe that it is both valid and important. Colton, a governing body cannot create morality, but it can create oppression and discrimination. Therefore, the Founding Fathers would have wanted governments to do everything that they can to avoid discrimination and oppression, leaving moral decisions to families, educators, communities, and individuals. Now, Colton, this principle goes way beyond the gay marriage debate and into virtually every controversial issue that this country faces. I have my own opinions on all these controversial topics. Some I may share, some I may not share. But when it comes down to it, I believe that when making laws, we should err on the side of maximum individual liberty. Then we should allow moral discussions to take place where they're meant to take place. Everywhere but the government.